Hi, I'm Stephanie Bass, and you're in Mixed Company. Welcome to In Mixed Company. This is a podcast discussing mixed race identity and discussing the politics of race respectfully and comfortably in mixed racial company. On the podcast today, we're doing Truth and Reconciliation, and we're excited to have an interview with Laura Kooji. For some people who might not know who Laura Kooji is the multifaceted Indigenous artist. She's an activist, an educator, a writer, an illustrator, and a beater. As an activist and educator, she has led lectures about issues regarding anti-colonization and truth and reconciliation. As a writer, Laura has published prose in many Ontario newspapers, and as a regular contributor to BentQ Media, run by and for members of Hamilton, Ontario's diverse and vibrant LGBTQ2SI+ communities. This year she published her first collection of poetry, No Rainbows, which has been described as, quote, beautiful imagery infuses this collection of lyrical poetry from a rising Indigenous poet steeped in the rich culture of her ancestors. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book after, but first, here's Laura Kooji. Hi, Laura.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Not bad.
Not bad?
Not bad.
Thanks for coming to the podcast today.
Thanks
Yeah.
for having me. I'm super honored.
You're honored. I'm more honored. So before we start, I always like to talk a little bit of terminology. And the reason why I like to do this is because one of the biggest concerns for people when talking about race in mixed company is, I don't know what to call people. I don't know what to say. So I always like to introduce people. I'm of mixed race. I'm black and white. So lack of sounding like I don't know anything. What are appropriate terms for referring to Indigenous people?
Well, Indigenous is a good word.
Good. I like that one.
It's not bad. It's the least of all evils, I
Yes.
guess you could say. I typically go when I answer this question, I like to say that there is no umbrella term because to us there was no umbrella term.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm Anishinaabe, my friend over here is Haudenosaunee and Ongwehome, and we have our own ways of describing ourselves and our sense of belonging to community. So, yeah, an umbrella term doesn't really suit us because it's not our way. But yeah, Indigenous is a good one. Indian is dated. It's no longer relevant.
It's not
yes,
correct.
There's government documents that still have that term. It's not okay. But again, there's a lot of Indigenous people that use that word, and again, it's one of those things where that's our word. It's been applied to us. We'll use it as we see fit. In certain circumstances and contexts, and a lot of older people still use that word, right? So we're not going to get down our elders for using that word. It's a word that they've had to live with their entire lives, right? So but for non-Indigenous people, settlers and anyone else, we always just like to say, Indigenous is a good word to use. And Native is not the worst, but I hear people say Native, and it's okay. It doesn't grind my gears as hard as some other terms.
There's a hierarchy of things that really tick me off.
I
have those too, the black hierarchy. I was we got the N-word at the top. Don't use that. I'll punch you in your mouth.
Yeah.
And then we have Negro. I don't really like it, but if you're 80, probably not going to punch you in the mouth. Right?
Exactly.
African American. No. Not really.
Yeah, no. I don't like Native American.
Yeah.
Or Native Canadian.
Yeah.
Please don't use that word.
Yeah, that's not what we called it. And, you're we didn't call it Canada.
And who said we consented to be Canadians?
Yeah, right?
There's
that's true. There is that true. So I use the word Indigenous. If I know the actual nation that somebody's from, I would like to use that.
Yes.
So that's usually, when in doubt, here's my strategy. I ask. That's a great strategy.
It's a great strategy. It's so simple.
That's a great strategy.
Yeah. What community are you from? That's all you need to ask.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, see? Now we're learning.
Yeah.
And the last thing I like to ask is, what can you tell us about your racial identity and what that means to you? That's an easy question, eh?
Yeah.
Okay, 20 words or less.
Oh.
I'm kidding. Go.
I don't like to count my words.
I'm kidding.
All right. Okay, well, my racial identity. So on my mom's side of the family, I'm Pennsylvania Dutch and German. So
is that Amish?
Dissident Mennonite is what I call it.
Okay.
Dissident Mennonites, because there's a little bit of badass in there.
Okay, yeah.
Because at some point, someone did something, and we got booted or we left or something.
Yeah, I got kicked out.
I have no idea what that's about. If my family's listening, if someone can tell me, that would be great. But I don't know what happened. Somewhere along the line, we no longer, our branch of family members on my grandfather's side no longer belonged to the Mennonite church.
Oh.
Can't figure that out. So somewhere along there, I have a badass ancestor. Love it.
Yeah.
And then on my grandmother's mother, they're German. They've been over here for a while. So yeah, just German and Pennsylvania Dutch. And they're pretty cool people and settled in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So very land-based family, you know, like my mom grew up on a farm and, you know, just that kind of very earthy, connected living.
That's cool.
You know, yeah. So, and then on my father's side, I'm Scottish and Ojibwe, so Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
So my grandmother was born in Scotland, came here when she was a baby, and then and met my grandfather out on the trap lines up north. And my grandfather is from Nipissing First Nation, and he attended residential school up there. And but him and his brothers and sisters went there, but I think they all left when they were in their teens, and they left that community entirely. Like they moved down into Niagara Falls area, and that's where they, for the most part, hung around. And Toronto, I had some uncles that lived in Toronto.
Oh, cool. That's
but,
awesome.
So it's just what I do feel sort of. So in terms of my identity, you know, and how I got to be here, you know, that was my grandfather's decision to move away from his community, you know, and I would, if there's one thing that I would love to do is be able to sit down with him and talk about, you know, why he wanted to raise his family away from there. And I think, you know, it's just all that pain and from all of everything that went on there in up north. So, but the good thing is that my dad took me back there, you know, when we were growing up. So I got to spend some time, you know, in my community and spend some time with some family members there and my great uncle. And he took me out camping and showed me everything I know about surviving on the land at a young age. And so I'm really grateful that I was able to have that sense of, I've always felt like I've had a sense of two homes, a home up there and a home down here in Haudenosaunee territory, which is really cool because, like, I grew up in Caledonia and my dad had buddies on the reserve, and so I've been connected with people on the Six Nations and New Credit Reserve. So I kind of have always felt like I've had two homes, and that I always had, you know, Anishinaabe and, you know, Ongwehongwe connection around me. So it's been it's a double life, right? Like I always feel like I am walking in two worlds. And really started to feel like that very strongly. I remember particularly when I was 12. It was when I was in grade 7. Like once my family moved away from Caledonia and into Hamilton, that's when the reality of who I am really hit me. It wasn't until I actually moved into the city. And it was weird because, like, in Caledonia I had a few Native friends that I went to school with, but not but yeah, like once I got into the city, it was just very clear that, you know, I found myself in this weird sea of people, and I didn't quite know how I fit. It was really bizarre. But and then the Oka crisis happened.
That was in 1994.
A little bit earlier than
was
that.
it?
Yeah.
I remember it coming to a head when I was just going into high school. So it probably was a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it was like, I just remember because I was in grade 7 and 7 when that was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was in early 90s.
Yeah.
So, and that was really, I think that really slammed home.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so not only did that move happen at the same year, but then also Oka happened, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a lot to have happen in a short period of time. But that Oka crisis really turned a bright light onto how I live.
Mm-hmm.
And my worldview is completely different from everyone else's.
Yeah.
So when I was at lunch, while I went home for lunch and I flicked on the TV, I was anxious to see the news because I needed to know what was going on. And I saw tanks rolling down those streets,
mm-hmm.
and I felt like I was in a war zone.
Yeah.
And everybody else at school was completely oblivious what was going on.
Or worse, they would have differing opinions about why people were on that land and should they be in that land. And
you hear all kinds. Yeah, I heard all kinds of things. And I showed up to school one day with a red bandana around my arm, and I was almost suspended. I was sent to the office and told that I was affiliating with gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, that's not what's
not it
happening.
at all.
And then so I tried wearing my medicine bag.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Uh-oh.
Same thing.
Really?
Sent to the principal's office. You're not supposed to ask about opening up those medicine bags.
Yeah, no.
Right? Because they're sacred, and they were like, you need to open that up and show us what's in there because we think you're carrying drugs and blah blah blah. And it was horrible.
Yeah.
And like so then
as a child, you don't have the strength in your personhood or maybe the vocabulary to explain. No, we don't do that.
Yeah,
because you don't have that authority, right?
I tried to say, well, I'm not supposed to open this up. I just went by what my elders taught me in my teachings, right? And so I just defaulted it to that and said, well, I'm not supposed to open this up. It's meant for me and not for anyone else. And they were like, oh, well, blah, blah, we're going to have to suspend you if you won't. So,
Did you take the suspension?
Well, my mom came down and reversed that decision real quick because she's like, nah, this is not how this is
Mom's
gonna
ripping
roll.
new ones.
My mom, she had to rip new ones all over the place
believe
that
it.
year. She worked hard.
Well, it's awesome though that you have a mom that is so active in wanting you to sort of have both sides.
Yes,
of
absolutely.
your
mom,
identity, right?
Yeah,
that's really
she stayed
cool.
up all night sewing my regalia the night before powwows. She worked tirelessly to make sure us girls were outfitted right. And
awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah. So that's a heck of a lot more than 20 words, right?
Yeah, I didn't count. I should have counted, but I didn't.
That's okay.
So we're going to talk about. We'll sort of touch on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened between 2008 and 2015 in Canada, because I know that you're doing a lecture very soon on August 22nd, and we'll talk about that too. And so I think it's something that a lot of people don't really understand because they haven't kept up on it. It is a lot of reading, and the website is great, and it's very spelled out, but you have to go to the website and read it.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that a lot of people either don't know to do or don't put the time aside to do.
Yes.
So I did a little bit of research, and the commission was established in 2008, and it was an organization that wanted to talk about the history and the impact of residential schooling. And for people who, I don't know, have been living under rocks in Canada and don't know what a residential school is. I mean, there's children's books about it that I've read that have outlined how terrible the treatment was. Forced colonization of Indigenous students that were kidnapped and lived in this system where there was abuse that was rampant, and just a lot of mistreatment and terrible stories that came out of it. So this commission had released a summary of report after interviewing thousands of Indigenous people, and they had their findings, which are the 94 calls to action. And there are 94 calls to action, and they're divided into sort of legacy and reconciliation. And so the reconciliation part I am really interested in because I'm really not fascinated, because that sounds really pedantic. I'm interested in the idea of reconciliation and forgiveness, because half of my family is black, and they were slaves. And there's still a lot of hard feelings about that. And so this idea of reconciliation and forgiveness is something that I think is something that takes a lot of strength. So I've been following the TRC for a while. So you are part of a group that has written a 95th recommendation, which I would love to hear about.
Yeah. So during that process of listening to survivor stories, many TwoSpirit LGBTQ survivors of residential schools spoke and shared their stories. I can't say many. There was a couple, but they matter, and those voices were left out of those findings.
Maybe let's talk about what a TwoSpirit person is.
Yes, for sure.
Because I think that's something that people don't really understand
that term. Okay, so TwoSpirit is actually an umbrella term, and it's based off of the concept of two-spiritedness, which does exist as a concept within Anishinaabe culture, referred to as Nishmanadoak, two-spirit. But the term was coined back in the 90s as an organizing term, as a way of identifying as Indigenous and LGBTQ plus. So it was just a way of differentiating ourselves from the LGBTQ community, because we are unique. We have a unique experience of oppression, and we carry it in a much different way. Our lives are affected in a much different way, and who we are is affected in a very specific, unique way that other LGBTQ people don't experience. Right? So that's why this term was born in the 90s. But within each community, each nation and language would have their own words to identify gender and orientation and describe those things. But unfortunately, because of language loss, we've lost a lot of those words. And there's a man that I've been looking to for a lot of what I know. His name is Harlan Pruden. I got to hear him speak actually at the WIPSI conference last year. So I just have learned a tremendous amount of wisdom from him. But he's Cree, and he talks about how the Cree people have 9 terms to describe gender and sexuality, and it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. So TwoSpirit is just as a way of as an umbrella. Some people use it, some people don't. And that's fine. But it's just a way of being able to separate yourself as an Indigenous person who also identifies as LGBTQ.
That is a great explanation. And
You're
so this
very welcome.
95th recommendation has to do with the TwoSpirit voices that were in those stories, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, the survivors that attended residential school that, in their communities would have just been okay with who they are and accepted in their community. But because of the generations of and the shame of homosexuality that exists in Christianity, those schools destroyed that safety.
Because they were run predominantly by the Catholic Church.
Yeah. And even I think a little bit the Anglican Church as well. So any Christian sector, they're going to be very shameful, and that's what they were. They tore our communities apart in many ways. It wasn't just that removal of our culture and our language. It was also the shame of our bodies and the way that we love each other and respect each other and our roles and responsibilities. And that was a huge part of what was lost. So as TwoSpirit people, we had roles. We had responsibilities, very specific things that our community relied on us to do, and that we also that gave us purpose and belonging. And so that loss is significant. And then of course the the homophobia and transphobia that's replaced that in our reserve communities is rampant. It's terrible, and that's why a lot of people leave reserves so they can live their lives and be out and in community, in urban settings, because it's just simply not safe to do so on the reserve.
Yeah.
And it's because of the residential schools.
And so what does the recommendation state? Do you think? Are you allowed to share that?
I can't share that right now.
Okay.
Because it's still under construction. We're just about there.
Okay,
we're
good.
getting there. We're getting
well,
there.
It's something that we can look forward to.
The beauty of this recommendation, though, is that it doesn't just apply to the TRC in terms of the mainstream community and its obligation to its obligation for reconciliation, but it's also to our own communities.
Yeah.
It's really encouraging our own communities to step up and go, you know what, like, yes, terrible things have happened to us, but also we need to really examine the ways that we continue harming each other. And that's one of the ways that I'm hoping that this recommendation will...
I hope so too.
Yeah, will
Well, I'm
initiate
going to be
some
looking
change.
for that. I'm really interested in seeing how that comes to be. I'd like to see what wording you come up with. Also, I told you we were going to talk about this a little bit in the news. One of the 94 calls to action was to have a day of reflection for, I don't like the word victim, but for the people that had been victimized by the residential school system.
Survivors.
Survivors. That's good. I
We
just
survived it.
couldn't think of the right word. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I was looking at the news coverage, and it kept saying Trudeau's going to give us a new holiday. I'm not into that wording. I do like the idea of having a day to reflect on these things, especially the treatment of Indigenous people by our government, which was not great. What do you think would need to happen for that to be a day that does what it's supposed to do?
Stop the other things that you're doing to harm our people. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want a holiday. I don't want a day off to commend anything, because that nothing has stopped.
Yeah.
Like, that when you look at the child welfare system, there are more children, Indigenous children in care than there were during the residential school system. So it hasn't stopped.
The idea that the residential school system is over, right?
It's not
the
over.
Are still...
The effects are still there. I mean, when I think of, I have to send my child to a colonial school where he doesn't have access to his language, and any attempt to get language, and because I work in the education system and it's an uphill fight trying to get languages into our schools, it's still happening. It's by far nowhere near over. And our women are still missing and murdered. Our TwoSpirit people are the same. You know, we're struggling. We face some of the highest suicide rates. The clean water in our communities. There's no excuse for that.
People have to live in.
There's just no excuse. The underfunding and of our communities is just it's horrific, and it's got to stop. And so I don't.
That was the thing that they jumped on, though. That holiday thing, right?
Yeah. No, all of this,
of all the calls to action, that was the one. That,
it's the biggest cop out that it's the easiest thing that they could do.
It does seem very
right, because they can't. They won't tackle anything else. And so to me, a holiday is a slap in the face.
Well, and then, like I said, it means like, oh, we'll remember this because it happened. No, I think it's happening.
It's happening.
Because you still have people who had survived that system and the effects of that trauma, right?
Yeah.
And the generational effects of that. Like, and because my family grew up in the southern United States, you see the effects of slavery. I know it was in the 1860s. That doesn't mean that my grandparents weren't affected by it, and that the political systems that were in place after slavery had been finished, that they completely disappeared, right? And so I think that's where my criticism was. It's just that we don't need a day to remember something that is still happening.
Yeah.
Right? We still should be working towards
You need to be fixing this. You need
legacy,
to be stopping
right?
this. Yeah, exactly.
And so that was part of my problem.
Yeah.
We're having a good conversation.
Yeah.
I gotta look at my questions. I think a really important question, especially for my listeners, would be, how can you be an ally to sort of the Indigenous struggle? Not sort of, the Indigenous struggle, because there's a lot of challenges
Yeah.
to trying to get like fair treatment
Yeah.
as an Indigenous person in Canada, right?
Well,
So
if
how
you're
do you
in-
be an ally?
If you're in a position where you have the capacity to do more and make changes, do it.
Yeah.
Dedicate your whole career to doing that. You know, I think of all of these people that I know that work in various sectors in education and health, and these are the people that I want to be working tirelessly every single day of their lives to encourage and, well, not just encourage, demand that things be different. Just make it unacceptable that Indigenous languages are not offered in every single school. That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
It's not acceptable anymore to for our people to face discrimination when accessing healthcare and mental health services. Like, it's just simply not acceptable anymore. And so whatever your job is, that's, you know, if you first of all identify how you can who you need to talk to, and you know what, these conversations are uncomfortable and you could risk your job. Do that.
Yeah.
Because people are risking their lives every day just to survive. So, you know, at what point, whose comfort matters?
Yeah.
Right? So have those tough conversations, and
And there are ways to have those conversations where it doesn't jeopardize your job.
It-
Because
it's
we
true.
are protected under the law, right? Like,
yeah,
so...
yeah, right. But so many people, they just don't know how to get started, and they just don't know what to do, and it's just like, well, just start in very simple terms.
Yeah, I would
you
say
know?
do some research.
Do some research. Get yourself as educated as possible. Talk to
Yeah.
other Indigenous people. Listen to Indigenous people.
For sure.
And honestly, if I can just make one simple request, don't explain to us what happened to us. I can't tell you. I mean, I get people are excited and they just want to be able to talk shop with another Indigenous person, but like, I feel like so many and people, they're learning, right? And they want to reflect that and show that they've been learning. But also, what that ends up meaning is that I end up listening to somebody, a white person, talking for 15 minutes, telling me all about residential schools and what happened, and I'm like, I know. I know.
Yeah.
My grandpa went through it,
Yeah.
and I'm living it. I'm living the outcome. Like, I
Yeah.
get it. You don't. So, you know, learn, but then also, if you have questions, ask them for sure. But like, just be prepared to do more listening than talking. And
I always say a good ally listens 3 times as much as they speak.
yes,
So
that's good.
that's always my sort of rule. My husband's white, and he, even on this podcast, sometimes he does what I call the white mansplanation. And sometimes he'll catch himself because I'll just shake my head. And he'll be like, oh, I mean, I'm sorry. Did you want to say something, honey? That's what he usually...
Yeah.
And it's hard to learn to get out of that mindset, right?
It is,
But if
yeah.
somebody's like, ho, I know. I understand. I think that people need to not be so threatened
Yeah.
by, you know, people of color that have some knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right.
For sure.
Let's talk about your book.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, why did you decide to write this book of poetry?
Oh, dear.
That's my lame opening question about your book.
Actually, the book told me to write it. I didn't come up with that idea.
All right.
That's gonna help.
This is a very artistic-y answer.
Actually, it's really not. I had a friend of mine contacted me and said that they had a connection to a publisher or a friend. So it was like a friend of a friend. It was like a chain of people that led me to this publisher. And so they asked, you know, would you like to be in touch with this publisher? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
And so then we were put in touch, and, you know, I let them know. I'm like, well, you know, I only have like a couple of pieces that I've written. I haven't really written a whole lot. Like, I don't have anything ready. And they're like, it's okay. We'll work with you, and yada, yada. And so the publisher, Bayou Arts, they've been very patient with me and letting me get my stuff together. And so so that's kind of how it happened. And so I was sort of led to this whole, okay, well, I guess I'm writing a book then. So I just started writing more and more over the last year.
And you've done some performances of your poems.
I have, yeah. And even before this, before my connection to the publisher, I shared a few poems here and there that I started working on, and so yeah, I started writing poetry I think about 4 years ago, and so yeah, it's kind of interesting how it all came to be. But
what's the title? No Rainbows. What is that?
No Rainbow.
Where did that come from? Is that the title of a poem, or
it's actually a line from one of my poems.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's actually the first part of a line. I don't want to give it away.
Okay. You have to read the book.
You have to read the book to find out.
You just have to buy it and read it.
Yeah, exactly.
I will have a link to where you could buy the book from several different places on the blog. So you could buy a copy. I have to buy a copy. It's not out yet. And I will buy a copy.
It's very soon, very soon.
And people can get your book. I just told you that it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So like, wow.
So you could go to the blog and find out where your own book is too.
Yeah. Trip.
So you are so nice. You're going to share a poem with us.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to hear it.
So just to explain a little bit about this poem, I wrote it after a dream I had. It's really interesting. Like, I've written about cultural appropriation in the past, and but this dream came to me way after the fact. I don't know. Maybe I must have been thinking about it that week or something, because my brain clearly needed to process something about it. Yeah. So this is a poem based on that dream. In a liminal dream place where I'm not here or there, I was walking along the water's edge, not in a city and not in the bush. In the tall, tall grass, I found a band that came from a headdress. No feathers, and it wasn't real. I left it there. I didn't want to touch it. I kept walking, wondering how and why it got there. I kept walking and wondering. Along the shore for 4 seasons, I walked through colorful leaves and redwhip. I walked through glittering ice and snow. I walked through mud and crisp air. I walked in the bright heat of the sun. Something caught my eye, and I looked down. On the rocks, washed up on the shore, the rest of this headdress, heavy with beaded mask attached, for dramatic effect. Someone's spirit creature, a costume for show for their New Age friends. This time, I wasn't afraid to touch it. It had been taken off the face of Meshkiki-Kwe. Its green, blue, iridescent beads I would reclaim and restore. Smudge them, boil them, lay them under the moon. I'd turn them into something beautiful. Something I could be proud of, to not feel disgust and rage. Something that would not be worn in a frenzy of theft and consumption. Something that would not be thrown away without care. And something that wouldn't be burdened to Meshkiki-Kwe. I would stitch my people's dignity back together. I would stitch to show my love to Meshkiki-Kwe. I would stitch this through the seasons and through places. Here, there, somewhere and nowhere. I would bead and be something real.
That was great.
Thanks.
Makes me feel bad for owning a pair of those moccasins.
No, well, what kind of moccasins are they?
Actually, I bought them from a company. They're Manitoba moccasins. So
okay, those are okay. Those are not the worst. No, those are not the worst.
It's not so bad.
No. Yeah, all right. At least the
company is Indigenous owned.
It is Indigenous owned, and
it's interesting though, the idea of the appropriation. Like, sometimes you see T-shirts that says "Coffee is my spirit animal." Like that.
Don't do that.
I know it's so prevalent. It's terrible.
It's everywhere. It's awful.
That was great. Thank you so much for showing. I'm trying not to cry. I'm being professional.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
So thank you very much. You have a lecture coming up.
Yes.
On the 22nd. It's at the
August
YWCA. August 22nd?
Yes.
And I will put that on the blog too, so people can find it.
Awesome.
And then you're also doing another event, are you?
Yeah, the next day, the 23rd.
Yeah.
I'm doing a reading. I'm a feature reader at an event called Moon Milk. And that's at Haven, which is on Barton Street. So, yeah.
Yeah, and
that
I'm going to
gets-
link to the event
sounds
page
good.
on Facebook, I think is where I saw it.
Yeah.
So if people are interested, they can check that out too. This blog, we're doing it on a Friday. It will come out on Sunday, so there'll be plenty of time for people to get tickets to things.
Nice.
And thanks so much for sharing today with your story and your poetry, and it's such a good episode, if I do
Thanks
say
for
so
having me.
myself.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Just because the podcast is over doesn't mean that the conversation stops. We'd love to hear your comments, reflections, and questions. Visit us at our blog, imcpodcast.blogspot.com, or tweet to us at imcpodcast. If you're a Facebook user, we have a page there too at facebook.com/imcpodcast. New episodes upload every Sunday. Our theme music is the song Righteous Fight by Angara. Thanks for listening.